Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Yesterday, of course, we had a day off. It was Madaraka Day, and I'll come to that momentarily. I couldn't resist this tweet from McNeese. Voyager 1 is 11 billion miles from Earth, receding at 38,000 miles per hour. It must feel pretty good about that decision. Macro thoughts, lot going on, sense that something big is going to break, oil market under pressure, lots of things to keep an eye on. When I went back to a quote that I really bring up regularly, it's from Stanley Druckenmiller. As a macro investor, my job for 30 years was to anticipate changes in the economic trends that were not expected by others and therefore not yet reflected in securities prices. One of those trends right now is the oil market, where I think they are completely naked and we're going to see a very sharp drop. Soros has taught me that when you have tremendous conviction on a trade, you have to go for the jugular. It takes courage to be a pig, as far as Soros is concerned. When you're right on something, you can't own enough. Fair point. Not easy. Simultaneous rally of bonds and stocks will have to change. Markets need a 30% stock drop or 50% higher treasury yields. That's Holger. Bitcoin rose as much as 8.5% to $2,479 Thursday, biggest intraday advance since May 25th, when it reached a record high of 2,798. China's three biggest Bitcoin exchanges are ending a self-imposed moratorium on withdrawals, helping the cryptocurrency to resume its record-breaking rally. The exchanges suspended withdrawals almost 4 months ago, following increased scrutiny from Chinese authorities amid concerns of capital flight and money laundering. In February, the People's Bank of China told Bitcoin venues that it would close exchanges that violate rules on foreign exchange management, money laundering, and payment and settlement. 30th of December, when I wrote this piece, Bitcoin was below $1,000, and I said then the optimal portfolio at this moment looks like this. Long Bitcoin, we've had 100% return plus. Long Bitcoin, short gold, and that's done well as well. Home thoughts, happy Madaraka Day, Nairobi. This is from Lafro Hameen. Nice photograph of Nairobi. I was reading a short story on the New Yorker magazine. It's the fiction story for this week, and this got my attention. Nobody was allowed to be fully certain about God, and she'd never trusted anybody who claimed to be certain about God. And I have to agree with that. And I find it even more irritating when the conviction is so strong. And of course I believe in God, but why should I believe in a God that somebody else is convinced about? I think it's a loving God. I think Rumi's about right on most things. I'm still reading The Catcher in the Rye, but very slowly and savouring the way J.D. Salinger appreciates women. Goodness, got to read it again, and that took me to Jamiroquai, Cosmic Girl, because the girls are cosmic in The Catcher in the Rye. Political reflections, the current snap election called by Theresa May in the hope of destroying the opposition and taking a commanding majority. Robert Barnes, the US lawyer who made hundreds of thousands of dollars betting on Brexit and Donald Trump's victory, has told me his money is on Labour, outperforming projections because it's harvesting the anti-establishment vote. That's exactly what the YouGov model is showing too. Hervé tweeted me and said hiding away from debates will cost her dearly. And The Independent is writing Theresa May sees the election as a distraction. I bet she wishes she could get her hands on whichever idiot called it. And I tweeted back to her, it's just very peculiar. Who is advising Theresa May? Because the advice is outrageously poor. Now, obviously the big news is Donald Trump and his unilateral withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. In November 2015, I was writing about global warming, and actually 18 out of the 20 most affected countries are in Africa. So Africa is going to pay a huge price for this. A historic treaty, I wrote then in November 2015, I cannot but help feeling we're like frogs in boiling water. We have created massive interference with the cosmic fine-tuning phenomenon. What do I mean by cosmic fine-tuning? I actually studied cosmology, and at this incredible scale, things are happening where the equations are so mathematically extraordinary that it's just amazing. So, for example, the speed with which the universe is going splitting apart and the power of gravity holding it together, it's so finely balanced. It's just amazing. And the maths of it, there's a very good professor, I can't remember his name, I've spoken about him before. Anyway, Paris Agreement, a historic treaty signed by 194 and ratified by 147 countries, cannot be renegotiated based on the request of a single party, that's the UN. And departing presidential councils, climate change is real, leaving Paris is not good for America or the world, that's Elon Musk. President Trump said, I was elected to serve the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. And clearly, Emmanuel Macron has got under his skin. Macron tweeted sur le climat, il n'y a pas de plan B, il n'y a pas de planète B. Very powerful statement, and he's been phenomenal, I must say. Come here with us to work together, he says, to scientists on concrete solutions for our climate and our environment. Clever. To all scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, responsible citizens who were disappointed by the decision of the US. Listen to his video. Make our planet great again. What a great left hook that is. And I sort of was responding to something Simon Shammer was saying, and I think he's a geopolitical Bruce Lee. I mean, he's just amazing since he's arrived. And then I went back and listened to a couple of interviews in English from before. I don't know how I missed him so much, how I missed it. And similarly, I've been going back to listen to Jeremy Corbyn, and he's pretty interesting as well. So, Macron, full marks to Macron. If Trump invokes privilege regarding Comey, we're in for a wild legal ride. This is Bloomberg View speculating that he can stymie by invoking privilege, but I don't think he possibly can. Borowitz report, who's always very tongue-in-cheek. Trump says sleeping only 4 hours a day, not affecting his ability to CLJRYFF. Donald Trump tweeted early Wednesday morning that his practice of sleeping only 4 hours a day was having no impact whatsoever on his ability. Instead of the word govern, you got some gobbledygook. Trump, who repeatedly touted his high energy level during the 2016 campaign, tweeted that despite his grueling presidential schedule, he still had enormous reserves of stamina, which he calls stam-GYGYGGY. In the same tweet storm, he lashed out at news reports questioning his fitness for office, denouncing them as fakers with a percentage exclamation mark. The White House said that despite pleas from his legal team to delete his Twitter feed, Trump planned to continue tweeting, and that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos would continue to spell check his tweets. 22nd of May, I wrote a piece and called it Apocalypse Trump. Do take a look. How China's growing naval fleet is shaping global politics. Very interesting article in Bloomberg. Ship by ship, port by port, China has over the past 2 decades been assembling one of the essential engines of global power, a modern navy capable of projecting force far from home. China's Blue Water Navy and how to respond to it will be on the minds of Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, US Defence Secretary James Mattis and others gathering in Singapore this weekend for Asia's most high-profile security conference, the Shangri-La Dialogue. From the East China Sea to the Horn of Africa, the growing presence of Chinese warships is already shaping world affairs, a trend that will only accelerate. By 2030, The existence of a global Chinese Navy will be an important, influential and fundamental fact of international politics, said Patrick Crowney, director of the Center for a New American Securities Asia-Pacific Security Program. The US and its allies need to begin preparing for a risen China rather than a rising China. To be sure, projecting naval power across oceans often means aircraft carriers, and deploying aircraft carrier strike groups around the world like the 10 the US now operates requires a network of overseas bases. China lacks both. Frigates and other small vessels are expected to comprise the bulk of the country's future fleet. Xi Jinping is nonetheless making preparations to be able to project force into the Indian and Pacific Oceans, which surround the country's growing economic interests in Africa, the Middle East and Southeast Asia. China launched its first domestically built aircraft carrier in April, the second of as many as 6 such vessels. It's also developing its first overseas base. Chinese officials called it a support facility in the East African country of Djibouti, where the French and US also have military installations. Such opportunities are expected to grow as China helps develop ports around the world under Xi's 21st century maritime Silk Road trade and infrastructure program, of which the railway, by the way, is a part. So, China basically has created new facts on the ground, particularly on the islands. I mean, it's a fait accompli now. They've militarized those places. Japan and India have been unable, and obviously have been considering and trying and working their way to some kind of collaboration, but they have been unable to box China in. At TCAD, Abe Shinzo, who was the guest at the Tokyo International Conference for Africa, Japan, he said, and I was in the room, bears the responsibility of fostering the confluence of the Pacific and Indian Oceans, not if China has anything to do with it. And then I take you back to the 2nd of December 2013, when I was writing about the pivot to Asia. And, I saw that pivot as all about the encirclement of China, the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery. And Xinjiang is a prime example of what could have been lit, though the Chinese have put a great big lid on it. I was saying that I thought the US probably feels that it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and that was 3-4 years ago. And that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage. And I said that led me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and a momentum of its own. And I was saying then that I saw the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. And one of the key elements of the pivot to Asia is the air-sea battle concept. The concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities, incorporates distant blockade operations. Look, a blinding attack surely out of the question. Distant blockade operations are not, and that's why China's so interested in having the wherewithal to break through this noose in the sea. And then I said, given my belief that the eastern seaboard of Africa is a fabulous energy prize, which it is, and I said that puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into that geopolitical frame, which was what Abe was referring to. On that note, this is one of my favorite photographs by Faith Kanja, coastal evening by the beach. I, of course, am from the coast in Kenya. And just the colors that she has captured, that really got me. This is the most peaceful nation on the planet. Have a guess. Iceland. Putin denies a Russian state role in the US election, but says patriotic hackers may have mounted attacks. After months of categorically denying Russian involvement in cyber attacks during last year's US presidential election, Russian President Putin said Thursday that although the Kremlin has never used state-sponsored cyber attacks to meddle in other countries' elections, some patriotically minded volunteer hackers may have acted on their own to defend Russian interests. Hackers can be anywhere and pop out from anywhere in the world, Putin said in an address to Russian foreign media during the opening day of an annual economic forum in St. Petersburg, Russia. The Russian president compared hackers to artists who can act creatively, particularly when they are motivated by international relations and in the defense of Russia's interests. If they woke up today and then there is something happening in interstate relations, he said, if they are patriotic, they start contributing as they see it in the fight against those who do not speak well about Russia, he said. Now, let me take you back to what I wrote in December, when I said the first thing is plausible deniability, which is exactly what he's doing. And I said, I've no doubt that Putin ran a seriously 21st century, predominantly digital program of interference, which amplified the Trump candidacy. Trump was an ideal candidate for this kind of support. He's a linguistic warfare specialist. Look at the names he gave his opponents: Crooked Hillary, Lying Ted, Little Marco, Low Energy Jeb, Devastating and Terminal. The first thing I said is plausible deniability. The second thing is non-linearity. You have to learn how to navigate a linear system, the new 21st century digital ecosystem, in a non-linear way, which is exactly what he's talking about. That piece was called "We Have a Deviate Tomahawk." And I was quoting Don DeLeo. The specialist is monitoring data on his mission console when a voice breaks in, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. And it's very powerful now. New month, new highs. Dow, S&P and Nasdaq post record close ahead of today's jobs report, which is important in many different ways. The Nikkei 225 average breached 20,000 for the first time since December 2015. People are getting pulled up about Japan. Equities in Japan are doing better than what dollar yen is suggesting it should do. It's an improvement. People are looking more macro bullish of Japan. Let's now go to the currency markets. Euro, dollar 112.22, dollar index 97.23, dollar yen 111.61, Swissy 0.9711, the pound 128.59. I think it's going to have difficulty over the next few sessions. Australian dollar, bit of a recovery. Oh no, 0.7383 coming off now. Indian rupee 64.425. South Korean won 11.2171. Not bothered by all these missiles flying over the peninsula. The real not able to stage much of a recovery, notwithstanding the news that they actually grew in Q1 in Brazil, 3.2508. Egyptian pound, about which I'm bullish, like a lot of other people, including Carlisle, we'll get to that in a moment, at 18. I think they've taken the pain, they're doing the right thing on the economic front. South African rand, firm as you like, 12.8995. Untroubled by President Zuma, or rather expecting his departure imminently, and I don't think it's going to be imminent. Dollar index, let me put up a one-year chart. Look, the range is 93.50 to 99.50. Take your pick where you think it's going. If it breaks above 99.50, we're back onto that Trump reflation trade, but below 93.50, we're really going in the opposite direction. Sterling, I'll put up a 6-month chart. Where are we now? 128.60. I think it's going lower. I think we're going to go below 128. Gold, 1261.94. Well, geopolitical uncertainty is sky high, isn't it still? This is the US giving the finger to OPEC. This is US oil production. I just like this image that Nico FX tweeted: crude oil, very good delta, key price level on $49.59. We're well below that now, viewed on the quant point map. On the 8th of May, before the OPEC meeting and before that rally into that meeting, I put out a price target of $32 a barrel. I said it's a Wizard of Oz moment, folks. There is no one behind the curtain, and the market is primed to crash, which I still think it is. Iron ore sell-off deepens as new month opens with same old pain. The commodity has been on a wild ride this year, coming close to challenging the $100 level in February before collapsing over the next 3 months, as investors sought to gauge the impact of greater supply and the outlook for steel demand in China. Iron ore's latest leg down has happened even after a manufacturing gauge for the world's largest steel industry rose to the highest in a year, suggesting another month of bumper production. Spot ore with 62% content in Qingdao dropped 2.5% to $57.02 a dry ton on Wednesday, the lowest since October the 13th. The macadamia story is a beautiful one, said Richard Mattison. The macadamia story is a beautiful one. He's one of the biggest private growers in South Africa. There's about 600 hectares of the trees on his farm near Port Edward. In 2009, we got about 5 rand a kilogram of nuts. Now we're getting between 110 and 120. Wow. Emerald prices have soared by more than tenfold in the past 8 years. Venezuelan tragedy. A worker at the General East Cemetery in Caracas prepares for the burial of John Pablo Panalete. 11 days before Panalete's death, he sent out a tweet to fellow protesters. Sometimes one wins, sometimes one loses, but this time I'm not disposed to lose. I love you, Venezuela. In August 2015, I said, the end is nigh for crude oil and crude oil producers from Caracas to Luanda, from Riyadh to Abuja. This applies now. Frontier markets are still unloved, says the FT. Plenty of money has pursued emerging markets this year. Not so the outer realm of the investing universe flows into frontier markets, countries whose markets are considered too small or illiquid to be included in MCI's flagship EM index, such as Argentina, Kuwait, Pakistan, Vietnam, Morocco, and Nigeria, remain negative. Much may depend on perceptions of Africa, a large slice of the frontier world. Well, you remember I wrote that piece that Nairobi crossed into a bull market in the last week of May, and I noticed that I think Nigeria is in a bull market as well now. The last couple of years have seen a rise in Russia-Africa trade, with aggregate turnover reaching $14.5 billion in 2016, up 3.4 billion year on year. Low base, but growing fast. And then what I didn't realize is that Russia is the biggest supplier of arms to sub-Saharan Africa. It's a huge component of that. Economist, very interesting piece, why Joseph Kabila's ambition endangers the Congo. Let's march on the president's palace and drive him out, howled the speaker. And a couple of hundred supporters packed into a sweaty courtyard at the headquarters of the DR Congo's main opposition party yelled their agreement. Outside, a contingent of police, heavily outnumbered, waited nervously. The march never happened. It would not have got anywhere near the president, and no one for the moment wants to risk a repeat of the violence of last September, when police opened fire on crowds and 100 or so people died. But the economy is tanking, civil war is raging again in the center of the country, and patience is wearing thin with Congo's dictatorial President Kabila, whose final term in office expired 5 months ago. And basically currency is down by half. Copper price halved between 2011 and 2016. Cobalt is still well down too after crashing 2008. Commodities have recovered a little, but this has not prevented the collapse of the Congolese franc. Look, he has the support of President Zuma and Dos Santos, about whom he's been assiduous. And his adversaries, in my opinion, are largely scattered. The cost is penal on the economy, however, as we can see. June 2016, I said President Kabila, however, outwitted Moïse Katumbi by removing him from the street in the Congo entirely. Might well prove a cleverly administered technical knockout. And then I was talking about how, quoting Paul Virilio, the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine, and itself becomes a machine, a motor, machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. And I was also saying, this is June 2016, that the street is a tinderbox, and it has become a major area of political contestation across the continent. But Kabila so far has not gone over the line. Lucha Continua, the youth movement striking fear into Congo's elite. This is African Arguments, interesting piece. The return of the resource curse, well worth reading The Economist. Wearing a cowboy hat and holding 2 scrawny goats at the end of a tether, the farmer scowls when asked how business is going at Yamata Market, a patch of dusty earth, about 25 kilometers south of Kigali. People have no money, he grumbles, pointing at his unsold animals. As if to underscore the point, one of the goats jets a stream of urine at your correspondent's shoe. Rwanda's economy, like many across Africa, has been hit by the twin blows of drought and low prices for minerals. Growth in sub-Saharan Africa slumped to 1.4% last year, its slowest pace in 2 decades, reckons the IMF. This means that GDP per head fell for the first time in more than 20 years. And I've spoken about that before, it's rather alarming. Barclays sold a big chunk of Barclays Africa shares, and there was strong demand for it. I think actually there's a bit of a buy because everything's in the price now, really. I can't believe it's such a good, strong franchise as well. Eskom chief executive to be sacked 20 days after he was rehired. This is the FT, but this is the interesting point. Banks in South Africa and abroad have grown wary of lending to Eskom because of its links to the Guptas and other scandals. Everyone's looking at this the same way, an executive at a South African bank said. The one problem is the level of Eskom's debt. The second is the governance problem. The third is that people at the top are not only PEPs, politically exposed persons, but the kind of PEPs that banks do not want to deal with. They are being treated with extreme caution. Important point. Although it's not easy to cut off a relationship, the executive added, nobody's going to increase their exposure any more than what they have now. This is the important point. South African all share up 4.32% this year. Dollar versus rand below 13 at 12.91. Carlyle's $700 million Africa fund is eyeing 2 deals in Egypt. We are being more active in North Africa, especially Egypt. They've gone through a painful dislocation and done the right things on the macro level. And it's a very populous country with a lot of well-managed businesses. They're entirely correct. I think, that's the bottom. Nigerian all share is at 11-month highs, up 12.8% year to date. And if you take it from the trough this year, I'm sure it's in a bull market. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 13.62% this year. Kenya, lenders are entering a world where there will be smaller interest margins. This is the central bank governor, Patrick Njoroge. Returns will be much smaller, he said. Return on equity in the Kenyan banking industry declined to 13.6% in March from 18.2% in June, Njoroge told reporters. For the country's biggest lenders, the drop was more severe, slumping to 23% from almost 35%. That compares with an average of 17.4% for South Africa's 4 biggest banks and 22.3% for Nigeria's top lenders. Lenders are entering a world where there will be smaller interest rate margins, Njoroge said. Returns will be much smaller. Safaricom closed before the holiday yesterday at a record high and is up 16.187% this year. I said to Business Daily, it is predictable. The results they released were simply off the charts. And I also reiterated what I've always said, it's one of the few stocks in Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's on the radar of every global investor seeking exposure to quality investments in Africa. Bob Collymore, as I wrote previously, deserved another term at the head of Safaricom. He's done some serious heavy lifting, presided over a golden age of shareholder value creation, presiding over a price gain. This ignores the fact that they've been paying out 80% of their EPS as dividends, so just the share price has gained 322.68% more now, about 340 or 350. I did an interview with Bob after the full year results. Take a look if you haven't had a look, because there was quite a lot of interest. Listen keenly to stuff about artificial intelligence. Kenya shilling 103.34. Nairobi all share rocketed 2.61% higher just before the holiday. It's up 11.29% year to date and is closed at a 21-month closing high. According to the popular definition, a bull market begins when a stock, commodity or index rises 20% from a low. By that criteria, the Nairobi all share entered a bull market at the end of May. We rallied more than 22.71% from a March 9 low. NSE 20 closed at a 9-month high. That's up 8% in 2017. I said the bull market in Nairobi and other parts of Africa was externally generated and at a macro level. I said you see it in Nairobi, you see it in how the rand is trading a great deal more robustly. You see it in Sub-Saharan Africa's sovereign Eurobond yields, which have rallied sharply. And I said the government should swoop on that opportunity to sell debt, but I don't think they have so far. Thank you for listening. Wishing you a great weekend. Sorry for the verbosity.